Have you ever wondered what it truly feels like when the people you once welcomed into your family begin treating you as if you're no longer part of it, when your presence becomes an inconvenience and your worth seems to shrink with each passing year? Because that's exactly what I felt the day my daughter in law pointed at me in front of strangers and boldly declared, "You're out of the 77 million." Completely out, and if you've ever worried quietly, secretly in those late night moments when you can't sleep, that one day the life you built, the sacrifices you made, and the family you poured your heart into might be dismissed with a single sentence, then you might understand the chill that ran down my spine. But the strangest part wasn't even her arrogance. It wasn't the way my son looked at the floor, too ashamed to defend me. It wasn't the way the room suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were embarrassed for her. No. The strangest part was the lawyer, this older gentleman with silver hair and a calm face, who tried so desperately to hide the corner of his mouth twitching upward, as if he knew something even more shocking than her cruelty. And in that moment, as he flipped through the pages of the will like he was holding the script of a comedy only he understood, I couldn't help but wonder, what could possibly make a lawyer laugh during a will reading? Because laughter doesn't belong in those rooms. If you've ever attended one, you know the air is usually thick with tension, regret, unresolved grudges, and that silent competition for a dead person's affection. People hold their breath waiting for numbers, names, and commas. No one laughs, no one even smiles. So why was he? Why was the man who held my entire financial fate in his hands trying to contain amusement like a child hiding candy? And right there, before he even opened his mouth, a new insecurity hit me, one far deeper than losing money. Had someone I trusted made a fool of me? Had they tricked me? You know that fear many of us try not to think about as we grow older, the fear that someone younger, someone louder, someone who thinks they're smarter will take advantage of us, as if age automatically means gullibility. That fear pressed into my chest like a heavy stone. But before that moment, before the strange laughter, the pointing, the accusations, I never imagined my own daughter-in-law would be the source of such humiliation. If you're a parent or grandparent, you probably know how hard it is to welcome someone new into the family, to let them influence decisions that affect what you've built over decades. Maybe you've worried at one point. Will they respect the family's values? Will they care for my child the way I once did? Will they treat me kindly when I'm no longer the one in control? For years, I tried to ignore the subtle comments, the little jabs she made about future money, the way she'd roll her eyes when I talked about the past. But that day, she couldn't hold back anymore. She practically shouted it, her voice trembling with confidence she hadn't earned. "You're out. You won't see a penny of the 77 million," as if she was the one in charge. As if she had already won some invisible battle she thought she was fighting. And I'll admit her words stung, not because of the money itself, but because it confirmed a heartbreaking suspicion. She had never seen me as family. Only as a bank account, only as a stepping stone, only as someone who, in her mind, was nearing the end and therefore didn't matter anymore. But the lawyer, oh, that lawyer. He looked at her with an expression I wish I could paint and hang in a museum. A mixture of pity, disbelief, and amusement, like he was silently asking himself, is she genuinely this clueless? And suddenly, every insecurity she tried to place on me, every attempt to belittle me, to push me aside, to erase my voice, began to shift. Because something was off, something didn't add up. Why would the lawyer laugh? Why would he almost tremble trying to hold in his reaction? Why would he look at me, not her, not my son, not the others gathered, but me, with eyes that practically said, "You're about to witness something unforgettable"? Something inside me, maybe the intuition you develop after surviving decades of life's storms, whispered, "There's more here, much more." But before you think this is just a simple story of greed or inheritance or a bitter daughter-in-law trying to get her hands on money that was never hers, you should know this: the 77 million wasn't what she thought it was. The will wasn't arranged the way she imagined. And the lawyer, well, the reason he was laughing would not only silence her, but would change the future of our entire family, because sometimes life gives people enough rope to hang themselves. And sometimes it lets them drag the chair over, step onto it, and announce their arrogance loudly, just so the truth can hit them harder when the chair gets kicked out from under them. And that's exactly what was about to happen. So if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, pushed aside, or treated like your age made you irrelevant, believe me, what happened next will feel like justice delivered in the sweetest, most unexpected way. And it all began with a smirk from a lawyer who knew the ending long before any of us did. People often say family dynamics shift slowly over time, but in my case, the shift was so subtle, so quiet, that I didn't even notice it until the damage had already been done. It began with small things, things you'd easily brush off if you didn't already carry the fears so many of us do as we get older. Fears of becoming a burden, of being pushed aside, of watching your own child drift into a life where your presence is optional. My son used to call every day, sometimes more than once, just to check on me, laugh with me, ask about my cooking or my garden or the old stories I've told 100 times. But after he married her, the calls became shorter. Then fewer, then rushed, and then replaced by text messages that felt obligatory, not affectionate. You know, that awful, sinking feeling when you sense you're becoming an inconvenience in the very life you helped build. That creeping worry that maybe you're no longer the warm, comforting presence you once were, but instead, a reminder of responsibilities someone no longer wants. That's what settled into my chest in those months. My daughter in law, let's call her Alina, never said anything outright at first. No, she was too clever for that. Instead, she went for the soft spots, the subtle corrections, the comments whispered just loud enough. Why don't you let us handle things now? She'd say with a smile so sweet it felt rehearsed. Or, you shouldn't worry about money anymore, we'll manage everything eventually. That word, eventually, hung in the air like a warning. I could feel something shifting, but I couldn't quite name it, and that's what made it so frightening. Because when you've lived long enough, you know the most dangerous threats aren't the loud ones, they're the quiet ones that come disguised as help. And the way she started inserting herself into conversations about the future, it wasn't help. It was calculation. I'd catch her watching me with this expression, one that people reserve for clocks they're waiting to run out. It's a terrible thing, you know, when someone looks at you like they're measuring how much longer you'll be around. And perhaps you felt this too, the strange ache of realizing that someone believes your value decreases with each passing birthday. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we all go through moments where we feel a little too sensitive, a little too aware of being replaced. But then the comments about the estate began. I never bragged about my finances. I never flaunted the years of work and sacrifice, but Alina, she seemed obsessed. She'd ask questions with a tone that seemed casual, but her eyes gave her away. So, what exactly did the will say again? Is the house fully paid off? Do you have any, hidden assets? She once even joked, we'll take good care of the inheritance when the time comes. But I didn't laugh. Because it didn't feel like a joke. And my son, my sweet boy, he didn't defend me the way he once would have. He'd awkwardly laugh, not wanting to upset her. That was when I realized something even more painful than the comments themselves. She had a hold on him, a quiet influence, the kind that grows like roots around someone's confidence until it strangles it. He wasn't the same son who used to surprise me with my favorite tea or help me fix the porch steps without me asking. He had become cautious around me, as if afraid anything he said might ripple back to her disapproval. If you've ever raised a child into adulthood, you know how heartbreaking it is to watch them gently detach, not because they want to, but because someone else is guiding the scissors. And yet I said nothing, because that's what many of us do. We choose peace over confrontation. We choose quiet endurance over exploding the family structure. We choose to keep the door open, even when someone else is clearly trying to close it on us. But the shift became undeniable the day Alina started speaking as if my belongings, my decisions, my home, and even my memories already belonged to her. She'd walk into my house and say things like, we'll repaint this after later, waving her hand dismissively like she was already rewriting my life. And the worst part, she'd do it in front of my son, and he never corrected her, because she had convinced him that the future was theirs to plan and mine to fade out of. The isolation crept in slowly. Dinners became rare. Invitations stopped coming. Birthdays turned into obligated gatherings with stiff hugs. I'd hear from neighbors more than my own family, and if you've ever felt that, you know how deeply it cuts. That's when the estate talk turned from curiosity to entitlement. She began talking about my assets as if they were already allocated. When we sell the house, when we manage the accounts, when we reorganize the finances, there was never an if, only when, and the more she spoke, the more my son nodded along, unaware of the strings she was pulling. The distance between us grew so wide that I could feel myself becoming a background character in my own family. And maybe you felt that too, that terrible fear of becoming invisible to the very people you once held in your arms. But the most shocking moment came shortly before the will reading, a moment I still replay in my mind. Alina sat across from me, chin lifted with that quiet arrogance she tried so hard to hide, and she said, just so there's no confusion, you're out of the 77 million. We all know that, she said it so confidently, so boldly, as if she had already secured her place and erased mine, as if she was the authority on my own legacy, as if I didn't matter. But little did she know, the lawyer knew something she didn't, and the way her face would change, the way her voice would crumble, the way her confidence would collapse, well, that part was coming soon, and I'll admit, even in the pain, even in the betrayal, I felt a small spark of justice warming in my chest, because I knew something was about to happen that would remind her, remind everyone, exactly who she had underestimated. It's unsettling how a person's intentions can hide behind politeness for so long, only to reveal themselves in the smallest, sharpest moments. the kind that slice through your peace before you even understand what's happening. And looking back now, I can see exactly when Alina's plan began taking shape, though at the time it all felt like a gradual tightening around my life, a slow erosion of authority that I kept telling myself was normal, that maybe I was just overreacting, that perhaps all families shift this way eventually. But deep down, I suspect many of us know the truth long before we admit it. When someone starts circling your life like a vulture, it's because they're waiting for something to fall, or someone, and her comments, oh, they weren't harmless. They were pieces of a bigger picture she was carefully, meticulously assembling. It began with her pretending to help with my paperwork, offering to organize my bills, my bank statements, my insurance documents. If you've ever felt that sting, that unsettling sense that someone thinks your age has made you incapable, that their youthful confidence is suddenly replacing decades of your experience, then you know exactly how I felt when she'd sigh dramatically and say, "You really shouldn't be handling this alone anymore." What if you get confused? As if a woman who built her own business, raised a child alone after tragedy, managed investments for 40 years, and survived more life storms than she could count could suddenly be undone by an electric bill. But I let her help because sometimes allowing someone to think they're in control is the easiest way to learn what they're really after. And what she was after wasn't subtle. She'd linger over the numbers. She'd ask me to explain every transaction. She'd pretend not to understand simple things so she could press deeper. Why do you still have this account? Why haven't you consolidated these assets? Why isn't your son listed on this? Always your son, never my husband. That shift alone told me everything. She didn't just want access, she wanted ownership. And if you've ever felt the fear of being seen as nothing more than a vault someone's waiting to open, you know how cold that realization feels. But her true intentions came into sharp clarity the day she sat across from me in my own kitchen, tapping her nails on the table like an impatient banker, and asked, "Do you have a copy of the wills, the updated version?" I told her I hadn't updated anything. And oh, how her eyes lit up not with warmth, but with the kind of excitement a person gets when they spot a weakness they can exploit. "Well," she said, smoothing her hair, "it might be better for everyone if we made a few adjustments. To make things clear, organized, such a safe word for something sinister." And that was when her behavior changed from subtle manipulation to bold entitlement. She started speaking about the estate as if it were already hers. She'd walk through my home pointing out things she planned to modernize, discussing what she'd remove, what she'd throw away, even which rooms she would repurpose. She spoke with the confidence of someone who believed my future was already decided and not by me. And my son, oh, my poor son. He tried, in his quiet, uncomfortable way, to temper her comments. But the woman had woven herself so deeply into his mind that he no longer questioned her motives. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if he truly believed I was capable of deciding my own fate. If he'd allowed her to convince him that my age meant incompetence. If he thought the same way she did, that the estate was theirs to manage, not mine to live with. That fear of your own child being guided away from you, of losing their loyalty to someone who sees you as disposable, is one that many of us carry silently. But everything escalated the moment she learned about the amount. Not from me, but from whispers, rumors, exaggerated guesses passed from one nosy relative to another until the number became a legend, $77 million. An amount that wasn't even accurate to the specifics, but close enough to inflame her greed. And once that number entered her mind, her behavior shifted from pushy to predatory. She began making comments like, "You don't need that much money at your age," or "You should let the next generation take over. You won't be around forever." She'd laugh after saying it like it was a joke, but her eyes never laughed. They hardened, calculating, hungry. The way she'd watch me enter a room, as if assessing how much time I had left, made my skin crawl. And heaven help me, but there were days I wondered if she was simply waiting for nature to do the work she didn't want to dirty her hands with. If you've ever seen someone stare at you like you're nearing your expiration date, you know how cruel, how dehumanizing, how deeply wounding it feels. She even tried to isolate me from my own son. "Don't burden him with your worries," she'd say. "He has enough on his plate." Or, "Why don't you rest? We can discuss these things without overwhelming you," as if I were a child, as if my voice no longer mattered. And yet, as much as it hurt, as much as it carved a hole in my heart, I stayed quiet, because sometimes silence is the strongest move you can make. Silence lets the greedy speak too loudly. It lets them reveal themselves. It lets them tighten their own noose. And that noose tightened dramatically the day she confronted me, her voice cold and triumphant, her posture rigid with anticipation of victory, and declared, "Just accept it, you're out of the 77 million." She said it with a confidence so inflated, so arrogant, you'd think she had written the will herself. But oh, how wrong she was. Because while she was busy scheming, assuming, planning a future built on money she believed she was entitled to, the lawyer already knew something that would shatter everything she thought she had secured. And as you'll soon see, her downfall didn't come slowly. It came in one explosive moment when her lies met the truth, and the truth hit back harder than she ever expected. The day of the will reading arrived with the kind of heaviness you can feel before you even open your eyes, that strange pressure in the air that tells you something is about to happen, something final, something irreversible. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, not because of the will itself, but because I knew who would be there and I knew exactly how she would act. If you've ever had to walk into a room knowing someone is waiting for you to fail, to fall, or simply to disappear from their path, then you understand the uneasy tremble in my hands as I got dressed that morning. The lawyer's office was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet where every tap of a pen and every shuffle of paper seemed amplified, echoing the tension buzzing in the air. And when I stepped inside, I saw Alina sitting there already, legs crossed, back straight, face arranged in an expression of false concern mingled with unmistakable triumph. She looked at me the way someone looks at a locked treasure chest they believe is finally about to open for them. My son sat beside her, his shoulders hunched forward as if trying to shrink himself. You could tell he didn't want to be there, but he was too far pulled into her orbit to pull himself back out. And isn't that one of the deepest fears we carry as parents? That our children will grow so influenced by someone else that they forget the bond we once shared, forget whose hands held theirs when life was small and simple. The lawyer greeted me warmly, almost too warmly, and I caught that same flicker in his eyes, that little glimmer I had seen before, like he was holding on to a secret that amused him more than it shocked him. And I swear in that moment, the tiniest hint of a smile tugged on his lips before he quickly masked it with professionalism. Why was he smiling? Why was he fighting laughter in a room where most people hold back tears or greed or regret? The question gnawed at me, tugged at me, stirred that mix of dread and curiosity that made my heart beat far too quickly. We all took our seats, and the room felt smaller with every second. The walls seemed to inch inward, the shadows seemed to stretch, the air thickened with unspoken accusations and silent expectations. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded louder, like it was announcing every passing moment before the truth finally unraveled. And then it began. The lawyer opened the folder slowly, deliberately, the crisp sound of paper dragging across paper cutting through the tension like a blade. Every eye in the room followed the movement of his hands, but none more eagerly, more hungrily than Alina's. She leaned forward just enough to betray her anticipation. Her breath hitched, her fingers twitched, her lips tightened as though she was already preparing her victory smirk. I don't know if you've ever watched someone salivate over something they believe is theirs by entitlement alone, but it's a disturbing thing, almost unnatural, especially when that someone looks at you as if you're merely an obstacle in the way of what they deserve. Before we begin, the lawyer said, clearing his throat, is everyone comfortable? Alina nodded so quickly it was as if she feared he might delay her imagined triumph. My son simply muttered, yes, without lifting his eyes. I merely folded my hands in my lap, feeling the weight of every insecurity, every fear, every unspoken ache settle into my chest, but also feeling that strange, persistent sense that something unexpected was coming. The lawyer's eyes flicked toward me again, and this time that flicker of amusement was unmistakable. Not mocking, never mocking, but knowing, almost protective, and that alone should have been a sign. He began reading the introductory formalities, the legal language that always sounds cold and distant, but it was impossible to focus on the words when I could practically feel Alina vibrating with anticipation beside me. She kept glancing around the room as if mentally placing little flags on the property she believed would soon be hers. When he read my late husband's name, she smirked. When he mentioned the estate value, she sat taller. And when he paused for just a second too long, her face twitched in irritation, like she was silently urging him, come on, get to the part where I win. If she had known what was coming next, she wouldn't have been so eager. Now, the lawyer continued, his voice smooth but tinged with a hint of restrained amusement. Before we address the distribution of the assets, I'd like to make clear that this will contain some revisions. Revisions. That one word sent a visible ripple across the room. My son stiffened. Alina blinked rapidly, and her smug smile faltered for just a breath, just long enough to reveal the first crack. Revisions, she repeated, her tone sharpened with alarm she tried to hide. What do you mean revisions? The lawyer didn't answer her. He simply turned the page slowly, painfully slowly, like he knew the weight of anticipation pressing down on her shoulders. And then he chuckled, actually chuckled. A breathy, involuntary exhale of amusement slipped out before he corrected himself, but the damage was done. Alina's head snapped toward him, her expression twisting in confusion and offense. And my heart thudded in my chest because laughter does not belong there. It does not belong in a room where family tensions simmer, where inheritance anxieties rule, where one wrong word can ignite years of resentment. If a lawyer laughs in a will reading, something extraordinary is about to happen, something someone in that room isn't prepared for. Is something funny? She snapped. That tone, the one she had perfected over the years, finally cracked. She was losing her footing, her certainty, her confidence. And the lawyer, still gently smiling, replied, "Oh, you'll see, you'll see." Two words that hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Two words that made her face pale. Two words that hinted the story she had built in her mind, the future she assumed, the money she already spent in her imagination was about to crumble. And as he prepared to reveal the truth, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not fear, not sadness, but the quiet spark of justice waiting to unfold. What came next would change everything, and the look on her face when the truth surfaced, that would be a moment none of us would ever forget. The lawyer took a slow breath, the kind that fills a room with a tension so thick you could almost reach out and touch it, and just as Alina leaned forward, anticipating the moment she believed would finally validate all her scheming, he began to read. But his voice had changed. It wasn't the clinical, neutral tone lawyers usually use. No, this time it held something richer, almost theatrical, like he knew he was about to deliver a moment people would remember for the rest of their lives. According to the revisions, he started, and I watched Alina's face lift with greedy expectation. The primary beneficiary of the estate, he paused. And that pause, that tiny crack of silence, it detonated through the room like a bomb. Even my son held his breath. And then, is the person who demonstrated unwavering loyalty, humility, and genuine love, qualities that mattered far more than blood, marriage, or entitlement. Alina blinked, confused. That wasn't how she expected this to start. The lawyer shifted his eyes in my direction. Therefore, the $77 million, along with all properties and business holdings, are to be placed in a living trust under the sole control of her mouth parted. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. Her entire body leaned forward like a predator about to pounce on what she believed was hers. The matriarch herself, he concluded, his tone almost amused, who retains full authority over distribution, usage, and inheritance decisions for as long as she lives. Silence. A silence so heavy it pressed itself into every corner of the room. Alina didn't react at first. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. It was as if her brain refused to accept the reality unfolding before her eyes. I watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to outrage so violent her face flushed red in seconds. "What?" she spat, her voice cracking like brittle glass. "That's impossible. She can't be the beneficiary." "That's not how inheritance works," the lawyer lifted a brow. "It is when the deceased explicitly writes it that way." She whipped her head toward my son, desperate, like she expected him to leap in and rescue her collapsing fantasy. But he looked stunned, his eyes wide, his jaw slack, the air knocked out of him. For the first time, he realized he'd allowed his wife to fill his mind with assumptions she had absolutely no right to make. "No, no, no," she sputtered, shaking her head violently. "Read it again, read it again." Her voice rose so high it scraped the air. "And here's the thing about greed. They say it reveals a person's soul, strips away every layer of pretense until only the raw, desperate hunger remains." And she was stripped completely. The lawyer remained composed, but there was no hiding the small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth as he explained. "Your husband," he gestured toward me, "left everything in a trust controlled by his wife for the remainder of her lifetime. After her passing, she decides where all assets go. Meaning," he folded his hands over the papers, "you are entitled to nothing unless she chooses to grant it." The word nothing felt like it echoed inside her skull. She stared at me with wild, burning disbelief. In her mind, she had already redecorated my home, spent imaginary money, envisioned herself as the new owner of everything she never worked for. And now that future had evaporated in a single sentence. "That's insane," she screamed. "He knew I was family. He wouldn't have done this. She manipulated him. She had to." The lawyer's eyes sharpened. "Actually, he left a personal letter explaining his decision." A letter. That word made her freeze. The lawyer opened a second envelope and read slowly, emphasizing each sentence like it deserved to ring in every ear in the room. "To my beloved wife, no one has shown more devotion or loyalty than you. You protected our family, our legacy, and our values even when they were not respected by those who married into it." Alina gasped, an ugly, involuntary sound. "You have earned the right to decide how our life's work is carried on," the lawyer continued. "I trust you more than anyone to safeguard what truly matters." When he finished, the room again fell silent. Not out of sadness, but out of the weight of undeniable truth. My late husband had seen through her all along. He had watched her entitlement, her disrespect, her greed, and he had made sure she never touched a cent. This is wrong," she shrieked, rising from her chair so abruptly it scraped the floor. "You can't do this to me. I married into this family. I deserve something." The lawyer folded his hands calmly. "Actually, legally speaking, you're entitled to exactly what he left you." Her eyes flared with desperate hope. Which is, he didn't even blink. A handwritten note advising you to stop treating marriage like a business plan. If the floor had opened beneath her, swallowing her whole, it would have been kinder than that sentence. My son leaned back, stunned, finally seeing clearly, painfully, who he had married. And she sank into her chair, trembling with a cocktail of humiliation and rage. But the downfall didn't end there. The lawyer added one more revision. Your husband also requested that during the reading, I display the security video captured in his study the day you attempted to pressure him about the inheritance. Her face went deadly pale. My hands froze, my son sat up straight, and before she could protest, the lawyer pressed play. Her voice filled the room, entitled, mocking, cruel. You're old, the recording crackled. Just hurry up and finalize the will already. We all know she won't need anything once you're gone. Leave everything to us, we'll take care of it. My son's face collapsed in horror. She lunged toward the lawyer, but he stepped back. I think we've had enough, he said firmly, enough indeed. The truth had slammed into the room with the force of a wrecking ball, destroying every illusion she tried to build. And for the first time in years, my son turned to me, eyes wet, voice shaking. Mom, I'm so sorry, and her. She sat there trembling, the future she built inside her own greedy imagination now nothing but smoke and ashes. But there was still one thing she and everyone else didn't yet know, something I had been holding close to my chest. Something that would change everything one more time, and that revelation was coming next. As the room settled into an eerie, almost suffocating quiet, I felt something shift, not around me but within me. For years, I had carried a quiet ache inside my chest, the kind that grows when you feel your relevance slipping through the cracks, when you sense your family drifting away, when the home you built begins to echo with an emptiness you never wanted to hear. But in that moment, as Alina sat defeated, trembling, stripped of every illusion she had clung to, and my son looked at me with the eyes he used to have, the eyes of a boy who once believed his mother could weather any storm, I felt something warm bloom inside my heart. Not triumph, not revenge, but something far more powerful, validation. If you've ever been underestimated, silenced, or pushed aside simply because the candles on your birthday cake grow more numerous each year, you know how rare it is to feel that kind of quiet victory. And yet, even with the video exposed, even with her lies peeled back for all to see, even with my son's guilt painting his face a pale shade of remorse, the most important revelation had yet to surface. Because there was something none of them knew, not Alina, not my son, not even the lawyer who delivered justice so elegantly. Something I had kept tucked away not out of fear but out of wisdom. Something I learned only life, age, and experience can teach you. Never let someone else decide the worth of your story. As the lawyer prepared to close the file, I gently raised my hand. There's one more thing, I said softly. The lawyer looked surprised, Alina looked horrified, and my son leaned forward, desperate to understand what else could possibly be revealed. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim, sealed envelope, the one piece of my life that had remained untouched by greed, untouched by manipulation, untouched by anyone's expectations but my own. This, I said, my voice steady, is my letter. The room fell silent again, but it was a different silence, one filled with anticipation, confusion, fear, and curiosity all tangled together. I handed it to the lawyer, who opened it carefully. It wasn't a will, it wasn't another legal directive. It was a statement. A message I'd written in my own handwriting on a day when I felt particularly invisible, after overhearing one too many comments about how old people shouldn't be managing large finances and how the estate will run smoother when she's gone. The letter read, I am fully capable. I am fully aware, and I am no longer afraid. The lawyer looked up at me, confused. Alina scoffed. My son blinked, but I wasn't finished, because the second page held the truth, the part I had never shared with anyone. The part that made the entire $77 million situation far more complicated than anyone, including my scheming daughter-in-law, ever imagined. I created my own trust, I said calmly. And that one sentence hit the room like a thunderclap. Alina's face twisted with panic. My son stared at me like he was seeing a stranger, a stronger version of the mother he thought he knew. Your father left everything under my control, I continued, but what none of you knew is that years ago, I built my own financial structure. Investments no one knew about, assets no one managed but me. Accounts no one could ever access. And the value of that estate, the lawyer's eyes widened as he skimmed the document. My son whispered, Mom, what are you saying? And Alina, her voice a mix of desperation and rage, hissed, You're lying. You're just trying to hurt me. But the lawyer shook his head slowly, still reading. This is fully legitimate, he murmured, and quite substantial. I nodded. Yes, quite more than 77 million. If you've ever watched the face of someone whose greed collapses under its own weight, you know the kind of silence that followed. And for once, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't small. I wasn't overlooked or dismissed or talked over or treated like a fragile relic someone was waiting to inherit from. No, I was seen, truly seen. My son leaned toward me, his voice trembling. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I smiled softly. Because you weren't listening. His face crumpled, not from anger, but from realization. From the painful understanding that he had allowed someone else's voice to drown out the one that guided him through his entire life. But I'm listening now, he said, and there was a sincerity in his voice I hadn't heard in years. And for the first time, I believed him. Alina, of course, wasn't done. Greed rarely gives up without a fight. You can't do this, she spat. You can't control everything. You can't. I can, I replied gently. And I will, not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of wisdom earned through a lifetime of surviving storms, out of the realization that protecting your legacy doesn't make you selfish, it makes you strong. And here's the truth I wish every senior could tattoo on their heart. You are not required to hand over the life you built to anyone who hasn't earned the right to respect it. My son reached for my hand, a small gesture, but one that held decades of apology and love. I don't care about the money, he whispered. I just don't want to lose you. And that moment, that raw, trembling moment, was worth more than any estate, any trust, any fortune. Because sometimes life strips away the greed, the noise, the manipulation, just so the truth can finally surface. We walked out of that room differently than we walked in. I left with my dignity restored. My son left with clarity. And Alina, she left with nothing but the consequences of her own choices. But before you think this story ends in neatly tied justice, let me leave you with one last question, one that might just lead to our next story. What happens when someone tries to come back into your life after realizing the fortune they lost? Because sometimes the story doesn't end at the downfall. Sometimes the real chaos begins when they try to return.